You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to the 602 Club, Track FM's local watering hole, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is every single week, Star Wars baby, Christy Morris.
Hello. Or
Hey.
actually, should I say, hello, good sir.
How art thou?
I'm so excited to talk about this.
Yeah, this one is going to be very, very fun. And so, yeah, it really, seeing the trailers for this movie, I was definitely piqued my interest because of the whole setup and everything. But I am excited to dive into it specifically, too, with you. Because as nerdy as I am, there are parts of nerddom that I am not necessarily a part of, but you are. So I'm really excited because I think you will be able to add a lot of context that I don't even have, which is great. So,
Hey, and that's what I'm here to do. We balance each other out.
That's right. That's right. Our nerdiness, you got to balance each other out. So, before we dive into talking about Pixar's brand new film, Onward, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you are hitting us up on Apple Podcasts, giving us that star rating and review. Christy, I don't know if you knew, but we got a brand new star review there, 5-star review, and it said, "This podcast is just like a swarm of Venomites of Dragobon, exhilarating and off-the-chain cray-cray." They gave us 5 stars. So that we really appreciate that, Mr. Nod. And if you'd like to help out the show, go to Apple Podcasts and give us a star rating and review and help other people find the show. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah,
of course,
thank you.
you can find... Yeah, it's been a while. It had been a while, so... You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, though, and make sure you're subscribed, and you'll get the show as soon as it drops. You can find us on Twitter, @TrekFM. We're also on Facebook, at facebook.com/TrekFM. So like and follow us in both of those places. We've got the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference there on Facebook, where you can talk to listeners from all over the world about all the different shows happening here on Trek FM. And last but not least, we've got the associate producers here through Patreon. Ken Tripp, Davis Grayson, Ryan Maillet, and Daniel Noah. Really want to say thank you to these gentlemen for supporting the 602 Club each and every week through Patreon, as well as the entire network. It costs a lot, as you can imagine, to put out this many shows as we do here on Trek FM, and we honestly need your help. And so you can go over to patreon.com/TrekFM, and there are different contribution levels you can give at with some amazing perks. But in the end, honestly, every little bit helps. And so go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can be part of our team. So Onward, Christy, we're putting it in an O for Onward. And one of the things that really, from the trailers and then even to seeing the movie, that really kind of stuck out to me was this is kind of a whole new world, where the setup is this is a world where magic and mythology exist, and everything in this world is mythological, as if that's the world. And so and in the setup too, this is a world that's moved kind of beyond magic to things that they've found easier to do, which was like electricity. And so basically it's a world of mythical, magical creatures that hardly use magic anymore up to this point. So it was a really fascinating idea to me to create this type of world.
Right. Like it's sort of, I love how it begins almost like a storybook of like a once upon a time there was magic. And then it does get to this point of talking about how now they've transitioned from sort of the way that I guess hipsters might say we don't do things the old fashioned way anymore. It's saying that, that.
Okay, boomer.
You shush. And so they've moved on.
I'm the only boomer Well, I guess
You're
I'm
not a boomer.
So no, I'm a Gen Xer. So, but I'm close enough. So yeah.
But I can identify with that too. I think that there are some really wonderful things that can be done the old-fashioned way or the more difficult way, and you get more interesting results than if you went with the easy way. So I like that that's a big premise of the whole story.
Easy button.
Yeah. And I like that they go this route as well of really focusing on a world that's a lot like a fantasy already. It is very Lord of the Rings. It almost kind of the homes at first look like Hobbiton a little to me. And then when they transition, it becomes much more modern looking in like a suburban neighborhood. But I love how it starts out, and it really does make you feel like you're part of this otherworldly experience of fantasy, and things are ancient, and then they transition. And like you were mentioning, the other part of nerddom that is throughout this entire movie is Dungeons and Dragons references.
Yeah. There are a lot of those, which is fun because, like, you're our resident expert in Dungeons and Dragons because you and your husband play. So, I just wanted to kind of ask, in this world creation, were they pretty true to the Dungeons and Dragons lore and uses of things like the gelatinous cube?
Yes, it actually felt like I was dying to know if the writers were actually players themselves, because they seemed to know D&D so well. Because, and as also a beginner may not necessarily know of a gelatinous cube. So that's something that's a little more advanced that they threw in. But it relates to D&D anyway, just because of the kind of storytelling it is. Because Lord of the Rings and D&D are very similar. But they came in and then added all of these creatures that you would see in a D&D game, like the manticore, centaurs, the goblin that was the pawn shop owner, pixies, a cyclops, and then even having a dragon.
I mean, you gotta have a dragon.
Right. But the biggest thing that stood out to me also, because I've played magic wielding characters, is that Ian, the main character, becomes a wizard, and that he has to go through practicing, or in D&D as we would call it, preparing your spells. And so you're learning how to wield them, and that the more you level up in D&D or in the movie experience you gain, you can do the more advanced spells later. But I love how his brother is like, you can't just immediately decide to do arcane lightning.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing I thought was I mean, obviously pretty smart about the movie is that whole sense of giving the younger son Ian these powers, right, to be connected with magic still. And I did like that it was not something that was easy. Like he definitely had to work his way into it. And I thought that was really cool. And I like this whole, like, building this world, it was just so fascinating to see. We always have, I feel like like in Harry Potter, they might live in the modern world, but the wizarding world is still very much living in a completely different way, right? And whereas all of these magical beings have gone to just being normal, is what we would consider. Like, they fly on planes and
drive cars.
They have cars, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just so interesting because it kind of made me think of, I don't know if you know that Miranda Lambert song, Automatic. And the lyrics in her chorus say a couple of interesting things, because when everything is handed to you, it's only worth the time put in, and it all just seems so good the way we had it before everything became automatic. And it was just so interesting to watch the beginning of this movie. It sets up the story of how this world went from being a magical place to being kind of a boring place, and part of that had to do with people gravitating towards what was easier, rather than what took work, and it may have ultimately been better, because there's something about what we lose when we, get lazy, basically. And so I just thought that was a really fascinating thing to see them kind of play with in this world that, maybe by losing things from our past that way, that we're losing parts of ourselves too, because this whole... Yeah, because by the end of the movie, like, how many things... I mean, they've changed pixies, pixies are now flying again, centaurs are now running instead of using cars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're getting back to the way they were made to be. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing to talk about in this movie, and portray that there are things that maybe we've lost through all of this automation, that there's things that we've lost through all of this technology. There are things that we're missing. And part of that is like a connection to who we really are, but also a connection to each other in some ways. And so I just thought that was a really cool thing for a kid's movie to be talking about.
And to talk about it in such a palatable way for kids to understand by literally showing you he's trying to create a fireball versus I can flip a switch. And, it's exactly what you're saying, Matt, about how you are kind of losing a bit of yourself, because if you think about something like letter writing versus email, there's so much, I think, lost tone-wise that you could convey better in a handwritten letter because of the way you're writing it than you can do with type. So, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, well, and just even thinking back to the lyrics of the songs, like, the idea that something is only as good as the time put in, and so I think about that in context of the movie and kind of the journey that we end up going on, right? Like, the journey is the thing that, and the time put into that journey is the thing that helps make a change in not only these two boys on this journey, but it has an impact on their mom, it has an impact on their mom's boyfriend, it has an impact on the pixies, and it has an impact on the manticore. Like, they change a lot of different lives by doing something difficult, but something to which has almost like a redemptive value to it, like to help them move forward in their lives. And yeah, that's just a really interesting thing. And so it would, the fact that, by the end of the movie, Ian is a wizard, makes me wonder then if, other people would then begin to, in this world, they would begin to study magic again. And so, I mean, that was just a fascinating question that I was left with. So, to me, overall, I felt like, them creating this whole new world where, mythology is like real, quote unquote. But they've lost that magic. They've lost that love and feeling, kind of, almost. And having that come back throughout the movie was really interesting, to see them find that magic again.
Yeah, it's like sort of a, if you don't work hard for it, you don't appreciate it as much kind of thing, or the whole, it's not about the destination, it's the journey along the way. It's all about really enjoying life itself for all of its pieces and not just trying to get to the end.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And how you get to the end also matters, right?
Right.
So, yeah, that's really good. We went and saw this movie with some friends, and we were talking about it together. And, one of the things that kind of struck me is that, obviously Disney has, have done different types of movies, and Disney had Frozen, right? Where it's the movie about the sisters, and we have two of those now. And it felt like in many ways that this was Pixar's answer to that, because this movie is really about fathers and brothers and the connection between the two and the way that all works. And to me, that was just really fascinating to see that play out. And I really enjoyed it. And so, the idea of, like, the importance of good male role models in a boy's transition from childhood to manhood, I thought was really cool to watch play out, especially between Ian and his brother Barley, because Ian comes to realize that his brother Barley has been way more to him than just a brother. And I thought it was kind of a beautiful story in that way.
Yeah, I think that they did an excellent job with using this as the focal point that everything else focuses or happens around. Because I think that for a Pixar movie, or for any movie for that matter, to be good, it has to have some kind of pull at your heartstrings story that is central to it all. Because otherwise it's just a lot of fluff with no meat to it. And so I don't know if you knew as well that this actually was inspired by the director's own personal life story.
Oh, really? I did not know that. I did not read that. That's really cool.
Yeah, apparently when Dan Scanlon and his brother were ages 1 and 3, their father passed away. And then he found a recording of his dad's voice, and that inspired him to not only write the story, but then also have that scene with the stereo in the movie.
That scene, man, whew, that was...
Oh, it's heart-wrenching.
So, yeah, it really is. And it's just so well done, too, in that showing... And again, this is where it's showing that young boy who's on the cusp of manhood to have somebody there to teach him what it means to be a man. And what I loved is the way in which the movie helps him see, the journey helps him see that role has been taken by his brother Barley, and in the way in which his brother Barley has done that so selflessly for him. Like it hasn't even been a question for his brother whether or not he would do this or not. And I thought that was something that I was not quite expecting, because, the way that the previews make this look is that it's all about, finding their dad. But what I loved at this movie was not just about finding their dad, but it was about finding each other in a new way. And I thought that was really cool, because in the end, their dad is gone. Right. And he would only be there for a day anyway. But by them going through this together, they actually find that they are more together than they thought. And I really appreciated that message, because, one of the things that a lot of kids struggle with is, they might not have a dad, right? But that there can be another role model in their life that can take that place. And it could be a family member, like an uncle, a grandfather, a brother, to be able to take on that role. And that just because you may have lost a father doesn't mean there won't necessarily be a father figure in your life, but that it's vitally important for young men to have a father figure in their life. Like it's mandatory for a boy to learn manhood from somebody else, and Ian gets that opportunity to do that from his brother, which I think is really beautiful. And I think vice versa, you kind of see the difference for Barley. The reason maybe Barley isn't quite as together as he might be is because he's been playing a fatherly role to his brother, but at the same time, he hasn't necessarily had anybody pouring that manhood into him. And so I just, again, I think they play it really subtly there, but I think they do it so well to just show how important this really is in especially young boys' lives.
And I'm glad that you mentioned especially the part about Barley not having necessarily matured yet, because I've actually seen that firsthand with a second cousin in my family, that sometimes someone is thrust into this position of having to become like the father figure for their younger sibling, and then they don't really have the chance to grow up on their own and just be a kid. And so it's kind of like Barley is still this perpetual kid because he hasn't learned that yet about how to get past that. But I also like that it reminds you, aside from that, to keep your inner child alive, I guess is what I also take from it. That Barley loves all of these things, but it's also because he wants to teach other people about it, and he wants his younger brother to do it with him, and he keeps trying to tell him, like, no, it's not silly, like, it's based on real things, and then this is how they changed it a little bit to make it more interesting, but you can use this in your life.
Well, and I think there's a beautiful you mentioning that just brings to mind, Barley himself, by him holding on to these historical things, like he hasn't lost sight of the things in which history can teach us, right? And he's also looking back and asking that question we kind of asked a little bit, is like, are you missing something in the way that you're doing things because you aren't remembering the past? You've maybe taken away something from yourself because you're doing things with the easy button, and so, again, I'm not a Luddite. I'm just saying that there is an importance to maybe seeing the validity of the past, and not having a chronological snobbery and saying, oh, we're automatically better where we are now just because we're further along in time. Like, that's
right.
Just dumb and unwise to say that kind of thing. So,
but yeah, I completely agree that I think the most important part of this movie is how they talk about the relationship that the two of them each had with their father, or didn't have, how they were different. That you find out later that Barley never said goodbye to his dad, and that Ian didn't get the chance to. And so how the two of them grapple with that. And then, exactly like you said, okay, even if you can bring back your dad after all of this work, it's only for a day. And then it gets down to, like, it's for a few minutes. Yeah. And you have to eventually accept that somebody is gone and you have to move on with your life.
Yeah, I think the thing that I really appreciated was the way that their father's quest actually helps the boys transition from being boys into being men in many ways. And that even though he's not there, his legacy is still strong enough to impact his sons. And so I thought that was really beautiful, because even from basically beyond the grave, this quest is the thing to which both boys are able to grow beyond some of their fears, to overcome some of their weaknesses. And part of that is by learning to do things even more together than they have before, but also to encourage each other, because, Barley obviously always believes in his brother. But what we see is that Ian actually really becomes somebody who can see the validity of who his brother is, too. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, is for being able to see the beauty of who people are for who they are, and not for who we maybe want them to be. So that was really, really cool.
Right. Yeah, I think it's so painful when he basically admits through omission that Ian thinks his brother's a screw up, and has to backtrack and then admit that he really did mean it and try to figure out how to change that. And getting to the point where he eventually does see what role Barley has played in his life was really heartwarming, because you're seeing him checking off this list, all of the things he wished he could do with his dad, and then learning, I already had all of these things right in front of me.
Yeah.
Somebody taught me how to drive. Somebody went for a walk with me. Somebody laughed with me, and so I think it's so beautiful that they wrap it up in that way. Like, you've always had somebody looking out for you and a male role model, and it was your brother.
Yeah. Well, and I think, something that kind of stuck out to me too, when we're looking at the story, was the way in which both of the boys through this movie are able to learn what it means to sacrifice those you love. And Barley's the first one to do it because, he sacrifices Guinevere to allow them to continue on their journey. And then Ian is able to reciprocate that with sacrificing, his time with their dad, so Barley gets the opportunity to say goodbye, the goodbye he never got. And to me, that was one of the most beautiful things in the movie because it just shows the importance of how true love is not something that is selfish. It is sacrificial. And so these boys kind of growing a little bit out of their selfishness, especially Ian kind of growing out of his selfishness of thinking everything's kind of about him, oh, woe is me, and being able to, basically see that, man, in some ways his brother had it harder than he did because he knew his dad, and that knowing of his dad leaves a bigger hole in some ways. For Ian, it's more about what was never there, but Barley has really filled that role. For Barley, it's about knowing what was there and now it's gone and there's nobody to fill that role for him.
But I think also both of them then realized that the person that filled that role for Barley was their mom.
In some ways, yeah. Yeah. And not to take anything away from single mothers whatsoever, absolutely.
But yeah, I think that it's nice that they move past the family photos on the wall and really focus then on showing the mom always being there with the two of them and how, she may have a boyfriend now, but he's not the central focus of her life. She still would drop everything and come to help her boys. And so I like that it does show in her way as well that true love for those in your life is sacrificial because she would drop all of the things she was doing, go work with the manticore to get the sword and go fight a dragon for them. But yeah, I do like the parallel, like you're mentioning, of what each of the boys sacrifice for each other. And that really, I guess, the two big points of the entire movie are fathers and brothers and then sacrificial love.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that brings something to mind that when you're thinking about the sacrifice era, it was interesting them working in the idea of, the mom's boyfriend. And it was an interesting thing because the way that they handle it seemed to be, I don't know, somewhat stereotypical, that the mom's boyfriend kind of sees the boys as maybe like he can't really find his in with them, and he kind of sees them more of as like a pain in the butt than, actual kids to be gotten to know and to, and two, to find a way to maybe be a guy that they could look up to. Like there seems to be a lack of that in the movie a little bit. And I don't know if it was, it has to be intentional for them to choose that, but I just thought it was interesting and maybe more than anything, maybe it's just the difficulty of what it means to be somebody like that in the life of a person that already has kids and they're not yours, right? Those are not your kids. And so the difficulty of then how to interact with them is really tough. So, I don't know. Maybe that's kind of part of it. So,
yeah, I think it was intentional. I think that it's showing from both sides that it's difficult because I think the biggest part was that the boys had not let go of their dad yet. So they couldn't accept having another male role model in their life because they weren't ready for one or they were refusing one. And so I think there was that. And then I think also just exactly what you're saying, that anytime someone is coming into a family like that, where it's, a spouse that lost their spouse and has kids already, it's going to be difficult because they're getting to know someone completely new and trying to work them into the group.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's definitely a good point, on that. So we have some great voice actors and great actors just in general. First, Tom Holland as Ian. What did you end up thinking him as the younger brother?
I thought he was so adorable because I think Tom Holland, as we've seen him in Spider-Man and everything, is so good at playing that awkward teen and still being able to play it off here and there like he's cool and everything. And so I think that he was the perfect choice to play this kind of character. But it was funny because I did not know before seeing the movie about the voice cast.
Oh, really?
I really had just seen, I guess we didn't talk about how he came into it, but I had seen one preview for this movie and I didn't know who the voice cast was. So I didn't immediately catch that was even Tom Holland.
That's cool.
So great job on his part then, because he's also British. So he's really good at doing an American accent then.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I really enjoyed Tom Holland's voice acting in this movie. One, because he did give him a more 16-year-old feel. And I thought that he just brought a lot of emotion to the role for this young boy who's, is trying to figure everything out, who feels so out of place, like has such a hard time connecting with others. And part of that is in many ways, it felt like he just kind of feels so inadequate for everything. And he wants to be able to, like live up to his dad and everything. But the problem is that he doesn't really know much about his dad because he's never met him and all of those things. He's got an older brother who's just kind of crazy. And so I feel like in many ways he's waiting for somebody to help him kind of find his way out of his shell. But he doesn't quite know how to do that. And of course, as we talked about earlier, you get them going on the journey, which allows them to kind of crack open each other, basically, and find a new comfort level for themselves, And throughout that, Ian is actually, through the journey, he gets the opportunity to know who he is, to know what he's connected to with his family, to know his connection with magic, and it gives him a new sense of discovery, but it gives him a new sense of purpose, and I think again, Tom Holland just kind of brought all of that to life really well, so that I bought every part of the journey for him, and so I really appreciated that, and I thought he did a great job, and with Chris Pratt playing Barley, his brother. They just play off each other so well, and Chris Pratt's just so good in this type of role, because in some ways there's a little bit of a lot of the different type of Chris Pratt characters that he's played, whether it's Star-Lord or, a little bit of Owen from Jurassic World in there, but again, Chris Pratt, I think he brings that emotion to the role that you really need, so that when he kind of breaks down and talks about things, you really buy it. I love that.
Yeah, especially with him. It's funny because when I first heard Barley's voice in the movie, I was thinking, that voice is so familiar. Who is that? I was thinking maybe it was Dan Fogler.
Yeah.
They have very similar voices sometimes, but yeah, I kind of recognized it, but didn't know it was for sure Chris Pratt until I checked, and then it was. But yeah, I think he's amazing at being able to do this larger than life, really pumping up that old English vibe, when he's speaking in this role, and then being able to at the same time do the really emotional scenes, like talking about not saying goodbye to his dad.
Yeah.
And Chris Pratt's really good at that deeper emotional side of characters. Like you and I have talked about the Passengers movie before, and how he can really get across these huge life themes that people ponder about.
Well, and the thing that I loved about the way that he plays the character and just the role in general for what it does, I thought it was really beautiful, because he's the character who has always been believing in his brother, and yet his brother just kind of hasn't really given him the time of day because he thought he's weird, but he hasn't realized what his brother's belief has done for him. And it's that belief in him that allows him then to, channel the magic that he has a connection to and all of that. And then he's able to learn to reciprocate that belief in and appreciation for who his brother is in a way that he never thought possible. And part of that, it all kind of starts with the fact that Barley as a character loves his brother, has always been for him, and has been there to support him and believe in him, even when Ian didn't realize that's what he was doing. So again, Chris Pratt just does that so well throughout the role, and I think him and Tom Holland just really play off each other very well. So it's important because if they don't work together, this movie doesn't work. And so the fact that they really, I think, gel perfectly as these brothers makes sense.
Yeah, I think so as well. And they apparently did behind the scenes occasionally work in the voice booths together. So they got that back and forth that you would expect between two people that are playing brothers. And then, they've worked together before on other projects. So I think it comes across really well in this also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you feel about, their mother is played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. How did you feel about her mixing with these two boys?
I felt like she could have gotten a little bit more development. I don't know about you, but I thought she was okay. I think Julia is an incredible actress. I've always loved her. I've loved her since Seinfeld. But I think that as a character, they don't really give Laurel that much in the beginning. She really doesn't get to do much until she joins forces with the Manticore and then fights the dragon. Yeah,
I will agree with you with that. I think you're right on about the way that they deal with her character, and so the way we're introduced to her, she's like working out and she's the she's channeling the warrior inside. I did kind of like how some of that kind of comes out, and that motherly protective rage is what gets her through everything.
Oh, yeah.
And I really liked the way that her and Octavia Spencer play together, who plays Corey, the Manticore. I thought their back and forth was really fun. And so, I think Julia really brought a sense of motherliness as we got further and further on into the movie. Towards that, and by the very end, she brought everything to bear on just how much she loves her boys, what she'll do for them, like you were talking about earlier in the sacrifice, that she's willing to sacrifice anything for her family too. And so this is it's a beautiful family trait in that. So, I thought she did a good job. I'm like you though. I think if they'd given her a bit more maybe to do, that might have been nice. But then again, it's the movie does a good job of focusing on what the focus is, which is these two boys.
Right, it's not really her story. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think, you maybe couldn't give her a lot of extra time if you were going to continue to focus solely on the boys' story. I don't know. I think they could have shown us maybe at least a scene of her and their dad as a flashback, to when they had first gotten married and had the boys and everything. But aside from that, I get your point.
Yeah. So I was kind of wondering, and I didn't put this on the outline, but, it was interesting to me, and because I wasn't sure what to expect with the soundtrack for the movie, but I thought it was an interesting choice that they have the soundtrack kind of play off the hairband metal, the metal hair bands, like rock, to go along with a lot of especially the action sequences. I thought that actually worked for the movie. When we're talking about this kind of like D&D, and you think about a lot of those old rock bands. Specifically, I'm thinking of like Led Zeppelin, where a lot of their songs have massive Lord of the Rings references and stuff. So I thought it was a kind of a good choice. And part of that too is obviously it fits so well with like Barley's character. And so when they're riding around in his vehicle and he pops, his, Quest mix in, I thought that was really fun.
Yeah, I think musically it was perfect choices for the kind of story they were telling, and that it feels kind of like a love letter to like the movie Fanboys, to this group of guys that are all really kind of nerdy and into stuff like D&D and Star Wars and ride around in this old van, and it may not be much, but it's got it where it counts and they love it anyway. And it had all of these references to the 80s and to hair metal and things like that you're saying. I thought was great, and it fits with the character of Barley. I mean, he's got this vest on with all these patches, and, he's kind of a perpetual kid. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I'm wondering for you, what then, we've been talking about this for a while now, and so kind of where you are with your ratings for Onward.
So for me, of course, the biggest thing that I was excited about, that I loved about this whole movie, was the lore behind it and the D&D references. And then, of course, the central story about the two brothers. It was a lot more of an emotional movie than I expected, and was really had meat to the story and not just fluff. So I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. Swords, I'm gonna say. What was it called? Like the sword of
the I don't remember.
Anyway, it's like the righteous sword. That's what we're gonna call it. That sounds right. It's the only sword of its kind.
Yeah. Oh, the price just went up. Yeah. I kind of knew, I thought I knew maybe what to expect, but I thought that this movie was just really cute. It was really fun. I enjoyed the themes in it. I loved the performances, and I had a great time watching it. And the Pixar animation is beautiful. It just continues to get better and better with every film. And so, yeah, for me, this is a 4 out of 5 Manticores. I think... There
you go.
It's a fun movie to be able to take your kids to and just have a great time. If you don't have kids, it's still a really fun movie. I went and saw it with a bunch of adults, and we all had a great time and laughed out loud. And so, this is a movie that's it's a lot of fun, and part of that, I think, too. Sometimes, especially just I feel like in the world we're in, it's just so nice to go to the movies, enjoy a good story, have a great laugh, be reminded of some great important ideas, and to go home happy, so in Pixar movies for the most part have been able to do that. So this one definitely gets my recommend. And it's interesting because this year we have a whole other Pixar movie to discuss later on in the summer called Soul, which looks amazing, and I can't wait to see. So yeah. Christy, it is time for some recommendations, and if it's okay, I'm going to go first this week.
You can do it.
Okay, excellent. So I am the book reviewer over there at the Star Wars Report website, where you also do Fashion and 5. And I got the review copy for the Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker Expanded Edition novelization. And I have to say, I'm recommending it. Now, it does not come out until the 17th of March, but I'm recommending it. That's my recommendation. So I encourage you to go buy the book. I'm not going to give you any spoilers or anything, even though a lot of the internet has already done that for us. But I'm saying it's worth reading, and it's definitely a recommend.
Nice. I actually, this time, I'm going to recommend something a little bit different. I have not revealed on this show, one of my favorite things in the entire world that I've done my whole life is baking. Actually, it's something that I've done with my family, in particular with my dad lately. And so I'm going to actually recommend a show that my niece turned me on to called Zumbo's Just Desserts. Don't watch it if you're hungry, because it will make you want dessert. But, it is a reality show, and it's a baking competition or confection competition, because it can't just be baking. But it's really cool because Zumbo is famous for doing out of the box ideas with his desserts. So these are things that have like dry ice and, you know, yeah, like a macaron tower and, like a surprise chocolate ball that melts to reveal a cake inside.
Oh my
it's
goodness.
really cool.
Wow.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. So maybe I'll make one day.
Well, and then you should definitely put on social media. So, Christy, if people want to catch up with you as you try one of these delicacies to create one yourself, where can people find you?
You can find me making my desserts and so much more on Twitter and Instagram at Bespin Bell. And then I do a couple of other shows when I'm not here on the 602 Club. I am on a show called Sabers and Spells with my good friend Teresa Delgado. And we actually just recorded our episode that's going to be coming out this week about our spells part of our name, how we got into Harry Potter and how it's one of our biggest fandoms. So you guys will definitely want to hear that. And then I do a show called Planet Leia on the Fantha Tracks Network with 5 other women from around the world talking about Star Wars. And lastly, I am doing a show on the Star Wars Report. I'm a little behind, called Fashion in 5, which I do a 5-minute segment about men's and women's Star Wars fashion.
Awesome. You could find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero under the name MattRushing02. I'm here on the network doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And in fact, Chris Jones and I just got a chance to record in the Ready Room where we talk about the first 5 episodes of Star Trek Picard. So that's really fun. You can check that out as well. I am on the Nerd Party Network. I do 2 shows. One's called Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, as we talk about Harry Potter each and every week, but we're doing that one chapter at a time through the book series. And so we are in the Half-Blood Prince right now. It's so much fun. It's kind of an evergreen show. You can listen to it anytime and catch up whenever. So definitely check that out. I do Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars every week. There's always so much to talk about with Star Wars these days, with so much coming out. And we just have a blast getting together to talk about a Star Wars topic. And then last but not least, I'm doing Cinema Stories with my good friend Courtney. And there we are talking about films built through the lens of faith. So thank you, everybody, so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?
Thank you.